Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I created using the Shimmerz May Color Kitz collection. I'm starting off with a piece of smooth white cardstock. I have coated it with gesso and I'm adding some Shimmerz paint to the left side. I'm going to add a little bit on the right side as well. I am using a Shimmerz called Antique Lace and I'm using the packaging technique to spread the color all around the background. This month, the Color Kitz had so many beautiful shades of blue, but I also wanted to add some of this really pretty golden color. I really like the combination of the blue and the gold color. I like sometimes to use one color in the background and then use a different color for the embellishments and the pattern papers so that there'll be some differentiation between what's in the background and then what's layered on top of it. After I'm done adding the antique lace to the background, I use my heat tool to dry it off. I try not to use the heat tool on my background for too long because it can make the paper buckle a little bit. When that does happen, I use my laminator to flatten it out again. I will use the laminator after I add the paint, but before I add any texture pastes or acrylic paint because that doesn't go so well when I put that through the laminator. I use an Inklingz called a burnished buckle and I added that to the background. I just wanted to have a touch of that darker color, so I used my paper towel roll and I lifted some of it up. I think that it adds a nice little touch and some variation to the background. And now I'm going in with a little bit more of the antique lace just to build the color up a little bit more in some areas. I used the packaging technique and then I also used my paintbrush and I dabbed it on in a few areas where I wanted to make sure there was a little bit more color. Recently, I've had a couple of requests to demonstrate how I add the gesso to the paper for backgrounds, and that's something that I definitely want to show everybody how to do who's interested. The next time that I make a batch of gessoed papers, I will definitely record it and then post that on my channel. I generally do talk about how I use a piece of paper in the background that has been gessoed, but I never show that part in the videos because it's just something that would extend the video a little bit longer than I'd like it to be, but I do understand how important it is to see every piece of the process, so that is something that I will be working on soon. I used my paintbrush and I added a lot of splatters of the antique lace. I really liked the way that came out. And then I went back in with the burnished buckle again and I added some splatters of that color as well. And then once all of the paint was dry, I started adding some stamping to the background. For the stamping, I'm using some Archival inks. I'm not really sure if I'm going to add more media on top of what I already have on the background, so I thought it would be safest to use the Archival ink. So I first used coffee with a text stamp, and then I used another Archival ink called Night Sky, and I used that with a Tim Holtz set called Faded Type. And then I use another stamp from that set. This one is a set of numbers, and I use that along with a Staz on ink called Midnight Blue. And I liked the combination of those two different colors of blue in the background. I think it'll go really well with all of the Shimmerz papers and embellishments that I'm going to layer on top. I like to layer the stamps together. You could see that I'm putting the number stamp in the same places that I have the letter stamping. And while, as always with a mixed media background, a lot of the stamping gets covered up with the photo and the other embellishments, I think that the little touches are still visible throughout the background. A lot of different techniques get layered on top of each other, and I think in the end, ultimately, you can't see each individual piece, but I think everything comes together to make a nice look. I continue stamping with the Staz on ink. I added some dots, and then I also added a grid stamp. I believe that both of those stamps are Tim Holtz stamps that I've had in my stash for a long time. I love the grid stamp. I add that to most of my backgrounds. And now I'm using a really old Stampin Up stamp that has dots on it, and so I'm adding a bunch of blue dots. And then I go back to the grid stamp and add some more of that to the background. I could just stamp all day. I love stamping with these background stamps, so it's sometimes hard for me to stop. And once I was finally done with the stamping, I decided to add some more splatters to the background. To add these splatters, I use two different colors. I use a Spritz called Powder Puff, that's a lighter blue color. And then I'm also going to use a Vibez, which is a little bit of a darker blue color. It's called Don't Rain on My Parade. And I just wanted to mention that all of the Shimmerz paints that I use on this background, they are all included in the May Color Kitz collection. If you've watched my videos in the past, you've probably heard me saying that when I add splatters to the background and I have an area of color, I often like to put the splatters right along the border or the edge of that area of color because I like the way the splatters kind of transition that big area of color into the background. So you have a little area along the edge where there's a little bit of color. It's not totally white, but it's not quite as much color as the main area of color. I just really like the way that that looks. I think it makes the layout look interesting when there are different sizes of splatters. So I started off by tapping my finger against the part of the bottle that has the straw, and that makes slightly larger splatters. And then when I use scissors and I tap the scissors, that makes slightly smaller splatters, and I like the way that that looks. I noticed that the stamping that I made with that really tiny text stamp and the Archival Ink in coffee looked kind of cool on the background. It was very subtle, but I really liked it. So I decided to add a little bit more of that, and I'm glad that I did that. I think that it added a little bit of something to the background. And now I'm going in with some gesso because I had a couple of spots on the layout that made the background look a little messy. Obviously, there is some kind of feeling of mess in the background because of all the splatters, but there were a couple of fingerprints and spots that I really wanted to get rid of, so I used some gesso. Sometimes it takes more than one coat of gesso to get rid of things like that on a white background, but the gesso dries really quickly. Now I'm going to add some stenciling to the background. I'm using one of the stencils that I've been using quite a bit recently. It's from a company called A Colorful Life Designs, and this particular stencil is called Grunge Dots. I really like the way the dots are really tiny, but I think they add a really cool effect to the background. I'm using some modeling paste from Hobby Lobby, and I mix that together with some thick body acrylic paint in white. And that has the advantage of making the modeling paste a little bit whiter, which I really like, but it has the disadvantage of making the modeling paste a little bit softer, which can sometimes make it a little bit more difficult to use with a stencil. I haven't had any major problems, but just so you're aware, it does change the consistency of the modeling paste to add some acrylic paint to it. As a final touch, I watered down some of that white acrylic paint. I used a fan brush and I added some white splatters to the background. Sorry, I cut that a little bit short. The background is finally complete, and now I'm going to start assembling the pattern papers that I'm going to be using on this layout. So that really colorful, diagonally striped paper, that's from my stash. I was just using that so that I could assemble all of the other papers on something that was 12 by 12 inches. I gutted a piece of the blue and white striped paper from the kit. I'm going to use that blue and white striped paper along the outside edge of my layout. I also picked out a piece of dark blue cardstock from my stash, and I cut that a little bit smaller, and that is going to be layered on top of the striped paper. And then I'm going to trim down my mixed media background, and I'm going to add that to the center of those two papers. And I like the way adding those different layers brings a number of different colors together. And I like that dark border around the outside of the mixed media background. Before I attach the mixed media background down, I ink the edges of it with some Distress Oxide in Chip Sapphire, and then I use a lot of ATG adhesive to attach the background down. As I had mentioned, I did run that background through my laminator. That's why it's so nice and flat. And now that the background is assembled, I can start working on the other elements of my layout. I'm starting off with my photo, which I mount on a piece of white cardstock. This photo was taken of my two daughters quite a few years ago now. It's funny how it seems like yesterday, but it was several years. I fussy cut out a whole bunch of flowers from one of the pattern papers. There was a pattern paper that had these beautiful blue flowers on one side, and then there were some other gorgeous flowers on the other side. So I fussy cut out the blue from half the page, and I cut out the other flowers from the other half, and I'm going to use those other flowers on another layout this month. But I had more than enough of the blue flowers to use on this layout, and I used the chip sapphire once again to ink the edges of all those pieces. I wanted to layer some papers behind the photo. I used dies that I had, and I cut out some pieces that I wanted to use as layering pieces. I don't end up using the piece that has the notebook edge on it. It just didn't end up working out the way that I thought it would. I do use a little piece from that paper. I do use, though, the piece with the tab on it. I'm going to be layering that behind the photo along with the piece of craft cardstock, and then you could see there's that little strip of striped paper on the right hand side of my mat. I was trying to do something a little bit different, but it didn't quite work out, but that's okay. I was able to just use some simple layering of the pattern papers behind the photo. I knew that I wanted my photo to go on the left hand side of the layout, so I used some adhesive and I attached it down. You can see off to the left-hand side, I have all of my flowers. I have them spread out so I could see exactly what I have. I also have some of the embellishments that are included in the kit. For example, the sentiment that says good times and the title that says today, those are going to go on the right-hand side of the layout. And then I'm going to include a whole bunch of those blue flowers on the left-hand side of the layout as well. When I was making the background, I didn't think about adding a cluster on the top of the layout. If I had, I would have added some Shimmerz paint to that spot right behind where I was going to put the flowers, but I decided that it was okay. I didn't have to have paint behind it, but I did want to include a cluster there. I don't know how you feel about this. Different people have different feelings about fussy cutting. I absolutely love fussy cutting images out of pattern papers. As soon as I get a new paper collection, I will look through to see if there's anything that looks like it could be fussy cut out. I just love the way you can kind of change the images a little bit when you fussy cut them. On some, when you cut out a repeated pattern, you could leave some parts on. On others, you can cut some parts off. And I just really love working with fussy cut pieces. As much as I love ephemera packs and I love getting things already cut out for you, I use those pieces too, but I really love fussy cutting out paper. And in this case, I used one piece of pattern paper and I was able to create two different layouts with the flowers on it. And I feel like just one piece of paper made into a whole bunch of ephemera is just really cool to me. So that's something that I've grown to love over the years. I did not used to like fussy cutting. And I also really love the scissors that I have. They happen to be on the right-hand side of my mat. They are Martha Stewart scissors, and I bought them a really long time ago. I don't remember even buying them. I started using them and it really changed something for me because I just really like the feel of those. So I think when you find fussy cutting scissors that you really like, if it's not something that you already like to do, you may change your mind a little bit about fussy cutting. And those particular scissors that I have, I don't believe you can buy them anymore. They are an older product, but I'm sure there are plenty of really wonderful fussy cutting scissors. I suspect, and I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that it would be best to look for scissors that have a very short blade, like the part after the screw on the other side of the handles. I think that the blade part being short really helps with the fussy cutting. In any case, you could see that I fussy cut out a whole bunch of different images. There were larger flowers, there were tiny, tiny flowers, there were some leaves, and there were even some little teeny tiny dots. So I fussy cut those out too, and I use those as embellishments around the page as well. What I really liked about these pieces was that they were different shades of blue. There was a darker shade and then there were some lighter shades, and I think that that combination really made the flowers in the background look a little bit more interesting. For example, the leaves are lighter than the larger flowers, although even within the larger flowers there are some areas that are a little bit lighter, and I was just having a lot of fun placing all of these elements down on the page. And generally, I don't cut out footage of me putting the elements in the background, but in this video, there were just so many little tiny pieces, and it took me a really long time to add all of them, but you get the idea. The background is filled with all of those little fussy cut pieces, and I scattered them mainly throughout the areas where I had added the mixed media to the background. Underneath the photo, I have a blue circle. That's one of the ephemera pieces. And I was going to put the heart that I'm attaching down now on it, but then I changed my mind. I decided to put the butterfly on that circle. And then there's another smaller butterfly that I'm putting on the cluster on the right-hand side. And then I moved that heart that I did have on the circle to the right-hand side where I have the phrase "good times." And I inked the edges of the heart with the Chipped Sapphire Distress Oxide. I have plenty of paper on this layout, and I wanted to add another material. I always think that adding different textures and different materials makes the layout look a little bit more appealing. So for this layout, I'm using some self-adhesive pearls. I bought these quite a few years ago when they were on sale for 75% off in Hobby Lobby in the wedding section. And I have been slowly using them up, but they're really great because I think there are 4 different sizes of pearls, and I like to have that variety of sizes, but these are available from many different manufacturers. I'm using my scissors to help me place those pearls on the layout because they can be a little bit tiny for my big fingers to manipulate. In general, I put the larger pearls on the larger flowers and the smaller pearls on the smaller ones. And I also included some photo corners. I use an EK Success punch to punch them out of some pattern paper. And then I attached them to all 4 corners of this photo and added some medium-sized pearls, one to each one of the photo corners. I wanted to add the date to the tab at the top of the photo, but I realized that that tab wasn't quite long enough for the whole date, so I decided I would just stamp the year, and I used a little piece of paper to mask off the rest of the stamp so only the year would be there. Then I rearranged some of the flowers at the bottom of the layout. I thought they strayed a little bit too far outside of the shape that I had made, that triangular shape with the mixed media, so I just put those in an area that I thought made them look a little bit more cohesive with the rest of the layout. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you take a look in the description box, you'll find the link to the Shimmerz Paints website where you can order this kit if you would like. I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.